Wonderful. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, Brighton. Woo! Day one almost over, right?
Hard to believe, right?
And we're the last thing between you and more beer, right? I mean, is that, okay. All right, good. I just want to understand where we stand. And I see that, didn't knock over anything. Robin has left us an official seal of approval sticker here. It's in the shape of a seal. Do you get it? All right. I'm upset that I did not hassle Robin more during his session, but now we need Tom's face.
There you go.
All right. All right, so we've got a couple of questions that are up here already. We're just going to kind of keep this free-flowing. We have some amazing guests up here. And we're Stump the Chumps, right? We're able to ask us anything. Is this being recorded?
Gosh, I hope
not. It is, all right, okay. So do
Oh.
keep in mind it is maybe being recorded. We do have to adhere to BBC broadcast standards. Is that, I don't know what those are, but they're probably amazing. All right, so we've got a couple of questions here, and then we'll riff off these. If you've got more questions, you can add them to the app. It looks like we've got about 8 or 9 in there. And I think we do have a handheld to pass around. Yes, so
Alex
we do have a handheld in the
back.
back there that Alex has got, so we're able to get those as well. So, first question. Well, first of all, should we introduce ourselves real quick?
Probably.
All right, so let's start with the person who's been on the podcast more than me, and we'll end with a person who's been on the Mac Admins podcast less than me. All right, so we start with Tom.
Hi, I'm Tom Bridge. I'm the Principal Product Manager for Apple Technologies at JumpCloud.
All right, Weldon Dodd, product at Kanji.
I'm Vicky Bacon, Apple Professional Learning Specialist.
Ben Toms, Head of Innovation and Platform at DataJar.
Who's been on the Mac Admins podcast less than I have. Ben does not know that yet, or does not believe it yet, but Tom's going to check the notes here shortly. And I'm Joel. I'm now of JumpCloud, previously of a few other places, previously of Nomad fame. Who's still using Nomad? All right, well, all right, cool. Beautiful. All right, first question. And we'll let the panel argue over who gets to answer it first, because I think we have at least 2 folks who might be able to want to do into this. What approach do you take to macOS updates on Apple Silicon, managed via MDM commands, managed via software update binary, or nudge users to install updates themselves? So 3 options there. What's the best practice for macOS updates? Do you do it via MDM commands? Do you do it via the software update binary? Or do you do it by yelling at your users until their life sucks so much that the only option they have in front of them is to actually do the right thing that they should have done the first time and update their OS so they are more safe? Questions? Oh, and the beer delivery has just appeared, complete with koozies. This is fantastic. Thanks. Thank you very much, Eric. Cheers. All right. Who wants to start?
Yeah, so out of the 3 options there, I mean, the software update binary essentially is getting more and more flaky and more useless as time passes.
Whew, shots fired.
Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong. The software update binary is less useful than it has been in the past.
Yeah, so you have to avoid that route. And then the other options there you've got, so deploying it via your MDM, that allows, as long as you've got a bootstrap token escrowed into your MDM, it can do the updates for you. Your users don't have to be volume owners. Your users wouldn't have to be an admin, etc. So in some situations, that might be easier for you. And if you've got like a lab environment, etc., it might be that's probably the only real door open to you. And you get to like push that button in your MDM at like 4 o'clock Friday and hope everything's working the Monday morning. Or maybe another time.
Lots of hoping.
Yes. And then you've also got the nudge side of things, which again was what Tom showed earlier as well. And, yeah, just keep on nagging people and stuff. My dad's, I once told my dad he doesn't nag, he just asks repeatedly. And I think that's what nudge is, what we're going to do, is just ask repeatedly, update. But in that way, the users will be doing that when they're able to do it. You don't want to do an update before they jump in onto like a Zoom call and the rest of it. So at least there's a nice way around that. But yeah, really I'd say MDM if you need to do it en masse or nudge.
Well, what's your thoughts here?
Well, we shared a few in our session, right? Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think that, what we're trying to do at Kanji is try to find a nice balance between the two, where we can have a little bit of guidance for the user, the nudge method, prompting the user, encouraging them to update, but still giving admins that flexibility to actually set a deadline. That, hey, we have a security policy in place, we have other business requirements in place that necessitate you have to update, and so we can pull that trigger when we need to. But of course, the flip side of that whole argument is you don't want to pull that trigger too early or without sufficient warning to the user. You need to give them some time to understand what's going to happen. You don't want to interrupt a Zoom call. We've got some sales folks that are not here at the conference, but they make their living on Zoom, and so disrupting them and cutting them off is not okay either.
Yeah, and I think that's really what we decided was based on all of the solutions that were presented to us, that the most humane was not to just reboot systems at that point without a lot of warning. And so, applying the mallet of loving correction, which is the MDM command, in that state it comes with prices. Like, this is a price that as an organization you get to pay. And making sure that you can at least say, I really did warn you many, many times in some cases that you've got the ways to handle this. Here's what I would hope that, we saw a huge increase in the number of features that were available for Mac admins like all of us in the last WWDC. We saw erase all contents and settings. We got deferrals for software update, even if they maybe don't work exactly like we hope they would. My hope is that we see, my real hope is that we get to see something better for macOS updates in the next version of the operating system. And that, that's always our hope, right? We go into WWDC incredibly hopeful that this is the year that our radars will be addressed in full. But I would say that that's one that I really want to see addressed, is a better experience for software update.
To summarize, software update, the binary,
Not so much.
we'd love, I think everybody, regardless of employer or anything else, would love to see the MDM commands maybe have a little more subtlety. Is that the right word to them?
Yeah.
Able
even
to
that, my problem with the update messages has always been that they're a little too subtle.
Yeah.
And
Fair
so
enough.
maybe a little less subtlety there would
But
be
at least
helpful.
a little more configuration or configurability.
Yep.
Instead of just
An actual deadline would be nice.
Yeah.
Give me a time and date stamp that I can include in the command that
Yeah.
basically says update by.
And the reality, though, is probably even with some of these changes, you still need a good, at least, policy of how to deal with your users. Do you treat them more lovingly? Do you not treat them more lovingly? And what's your interest in having them get up to the latest operating system version is? Because that's the case on both macOS, iOS, anything that you have out there. So having a good policy in place, at least as an IT admin, gives you also a little bit of breathing room that you're not having to create this on your own. It's not that you hate users, what Robin talked about a little earlier today. Users are good people, right?
Yes.
We're good people as admins. So we should be able to do good things together without having to be overly aggressive with each other. But a policy really helps in that because it gives you that freedom to know what you should be doing and how you should be doing it.
We've got a good comment from Mr. Jones over there. Alex, would you mind grabbing a mic for Dan?
Making you work early.
Would this be a good place to use something like machine learning AI to learn people's usage habits on their devices? So you could say, look, we noticed that this user leaves their laptop on and isn't doing anything on it every Tuesday between 12 and 2. But it's on, it's connected to the network, we know it's there. So actually, we're going to say to them, look, we're going to apply that software update then, and having a more kind of tailored, individualized approach.
I think that's a fantastic concept, right? I mean, if you look, all these M1 chips are out there with these huge neural engines on them that are mostly not doing anything. And there's some interesting concepts of could we do more AI locally? It gets around that whole, complexity of shipping user information or user data off the device. But if you could build a model locally that would kind of match that, I don't know how close we'd get. I don't know enough about AI.
Well, I think that, to a lesser extent, I think Apple's doing some of that already in terms of like when they notify you that there's an update and give you the opportunity to say, yeah, I'll do that tonight. That update is either sent via MDM command. If you send an install later, it goes tonight. But the operating system, if you've set it to update automatically, it has to determine at some point when to trigger a notification. And my understanding is that that's behavior-based, and that's driven by the neural engine. But in terms of the actual specificity...
What gives you that idea?
I think another place where that's really relevant, though, is in application patching, not just OS updates, right? Because with application patching, obviously, the application can't be running when we run the installer, the updater, so you have to quit the app. Do we wait until the user quits it? Do we hit some, So the approach that we take, right, is you set a deadline. If the deadline arrives and the application's not running, we just silently patch it in the background. But if the application's open, then we have to prompt the user. So that's very simple, but I think absolutely, having some more intelligence, some more learning to create a more sophisticated model of, when to run that update, when to notify the user, that would be very helpful.
Indeed. And Kanji does an incredible job with auto apps. And you guys deserve a lot of credit for how those operate. And the patching mechanism that you guys use is really spectacular.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome, Fred.
We're bringing people together on this panel. This is fantastic. All right, next question. Do you see the role of a Mac admin evolving into full stack responsibility or even perhaps transitioning to a cybersecurity engineering role?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I think this is a pretty easy answer, right?
I mean, I think the answer is always you need to know more now than you needed to know yesterday. And that's going to continue to be true. And security is going to be more and more important. Look at the uptrends that we see in terms of attacks, in terms of 0 days. You need to have an awareness, and you need to build that awareness muscle as part of your admin toolkit.
And to borrow a Charles Edge-ism, that's a phrase.
Don't use his name.
There's lots of tickling API endpoints as well, which is what we're going to be doing as admins to help administer things and automate these tasks as well. And when you start going down that route, you start building in these workflows, tickling this API endpoint for this, tickling this one, and it could be down to the security endpoints, could be your like a NAC type solution thing. There's a few different things that you can do around that. And you start doing that, and it's a slippery slope, right? And then you end up writing product, or you end up kind of writing apps, and if you enjoy it. But I could definitely say it. And I think everybody in here probably, you're not just doing Apple administration. There's not just you. There's probably other things you've picked up and dealt with. Often, some of the stuff that Stephen was saying, often we're kind of lumped with stuff it's a Mac thing. So there you go, you guys have that. And then it turns out that this design team you're working with need this file server or something, and suddenly your role's quite wide because it's Mac stuff or whatever, Apple stuff. And then from that will come the security side of things are becoming more and more prevalent now as the real career path in IT as well, which, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe it wasn't so prevalent as a career. I mean, but then look how things changed. We used to have Exchange admins and worrying about stuff on-prem, so.
The world and technology moves on. Since I'm the host, I'm going to use this to say...
I wanted to add some more on this.
Oh, all right,
it's important, right? I think there's a couple trends, macro and micro. So macro trend, what we're seeing more and more is that the IT organization and device management, endpoint management, now rolls up to the CISO. Where it used to be CIO, IT leader, and InfoSec maybe off to the side or somewhere in the IT organization. Now what we're seeing, among lots of companies, and it's not universal, sure, there's variety, but companies are growing, more modern companies, the whole technology org rolls up to the CISO. The last 10, 20 years, the whole story of productivity for knowledge workers has been computing, right, and technology enabling all those productivity gains. But in order to continue that path forward of realizing more productivity gains, security has to enable that to happen, because it's all about letting people work wherever they are, at any time, at any place, on whatever network, and security is key to enabling that future. And we did a survey we didn't do the survey, we commissioned it, but the answers from the few hundred people that responded there, but 70% of organizations have remote workers. And so in order to just adapt to that world, security has to be at the top. Now, on the micro trend, right, or maybe different scale, right, in order to effectively manage security on Apple platforms, you have to employ MDM. So everyone here who's a Mac admin, right, you're a critical part of enabling security on the endpoint, because those are the tools, those are the levers that we have to pull. That's what we can use.
Cool. Now I'll say, as the host, I can make my own pitches here. I am currently hiring Swift developers and specifically interested in folks who have come from that admin background. We do have a lot of good devs, and good devs are great people, but they don't have that understanding of why we're doing some of these things, right? And it's been really interesting for me, the developers that we have that have come from an admin background have a little more of that useful knowledge, that domain expertise. They know the difference between software update and what the MDM commands can do, and maybe the fun that's engaged in both of those. And so I think there is a lot of opportunities out there. If you are a Mac admin and looking at doing things differently, security, 100%, full stack. If you want to write web code, that's fine. Go do that. Go learn cloud things. But I think there's also real strong interest in actually doing some of the client tooling as well. Specifically, those developers are a little bit harder to find.
And following what Joel said there, we're also looking for a Swift developer. The same skill set he's looking for as well. An admin really, and it's the same challenges, because you'll find a Swift developer, there'll be an iOS admin, they'll use all the APIs and all the stuff that's nicely written in developer documentation. And then you talk to them about, hey, we want to run a progress screen, here's launch D, we want to run it in a login window, and you just see their face glaze over, eyes glaze, completely out of their depth. And people will learn, obviously, in time, but it's nice to have some of that running start, right? So,
yep, absolutely.
Of course, so yeah, Data Jar, we're looking for a Swift developer as well.
Question for Vicky, and we'll get into maybe a little bit more of an admin or an education thread after this. Did you see any issues with remote learning because of a disparity in connectivity, broadband access that students and staff had at home? I think the answer to that is pretty evident, but very interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, is yes. Done. I think the important thing that schools were challenged by was how to overcome that. So yes, there was an issue, but they had to overcome it. So where was the option to make the difference for those children? And I think a lot of schools were enabled by additional money from the government to enable that to happen. A lot of schools just ran around posting dongles through children's post boxes. It was about the motivation of the staff as well to get their students online. But I think that question is central to just not necessarily education, it's now everywhere. Everybody needs to have this connectivity, and it's the first question you ask. Am I going to have the bandwidth to do what I need to do?
Yeah.
And I think when schools don't, that's when you have to have the question asked about, okay, what's the strategy moving forward? How can we future-proof this?
My wife is a librarian, and libraries are evolving, right? You can now rent power tools. Rent is the right, she gets mad at me when I say that, because you don't pay any money for it. But you can loan power tools from libraries. They've also started loaning Chromebooks and hotspots. So for families or whoever that needs more internet access, specifically because of these issues, right? You can check out a hotspot on a Chromebook, check it out for 3 weeks or whatever it is, and then have more connectivity. It was really big during the early pandemic, still is now, but yeah. What question?
Somebody over there.
Where's the library? You'd have to fly to the U.S.
I think the connectivity was definitely a big issue for some kids, but I thought what actually limited the home learning in our school was the knowledge of the teachers in producing the materials on top of that. You know, and they could go to Twinkle or, you know, Oak something, and they could pull kind of pre-made materials, but those were commonly either, you know, PNGs or JPEGs or PDFs. There was no way, there was no knowledge in our school at all about how to turn that into something the child could interact with on screen, whether that was just some text fields or, you know, whatever. We printed God knows how many pages out and then took photos of them and sent them back. And I think the knowledge of the teachers was a really, really big issue in it. It was a really big problem. And I think there are some schools out there, probably some of the more, you know, the academies, that are more technically focused, but the more basic non-technical schools struggled massively. And I think that's a big area that the government as a whole need to improve on.
Well, absolutely, I agree with you. Being in the role that I am, I'm quite rare in terms of the country. So there's only 50 APLS in UK. So when you think how many schools there are, yes, that's going to be an issue. But for me, the question is about learning from these failures and actually getting in at the cause of that, which is at teacher training level. So many teachers come out of teacher training without any information about how to use the technology or how to integrate it, let alone using things like Shobi or Seesaw or any of those kind of incredible platforms that allow the students to upload work that is multimedia and then isn't converted into a PDF. So I think the answer is to teach, you know, at the training level.
Continuing with the kind of education thinking here, this is actually an interesting question. I'll rephrase it a little bit because it's framed within the concept of an M1 Mac, but I think you can just back it up in general. Is there still a need for education labs of Macs? I mean, this was Apple's bread and butter 20 years ago, right? I remember a lot of the work I did when I first came to Apple was very much focused around these large, you know, collections of Macs in a single room, maybe in a dorm if you're looking at higher education, or classrooms in, you know, K-12 and primary. So is there still a role for a lab full of Macs? One, if there is, how do you manage it? How do you make that work? And two, if there isn't, is anything else replacing that? Or where do we go from there?
So again, with the M1, as you were saying, it's absolutely changed the landscape for me as an educator because I can use an iPad. And so my iPad is just as effective at that learning as a static machine. Now, anything that's static then stops me as a learner. It challenges me to only do one way, whereas I can take my iPad and be mobile. So anytime it's mobile, that's a benefit. And again, if they're working remotely, at some stage they need to have a device that they can work there. I think labs are on the decline, and I think people, when they're looking at the finances that they do have to spend, find other ways to spend it rather than on a static machine.
If Mac labs are on the decline, are iPad carts on the upswing, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. More to one-to-one rather than class sets, because once the teachers do see the possibilities, if their support for them is there, they understand that it's a device that is a personal device. And so hopefully with all the amazing loan systems that we've got and leasing of iPad now, it's really competitive in the education sector.
I'm just kind of curious, is there anybody in a work environment, a business or commercial environment that has shared use labs, has shared use computers? What's the use case?
journalism schools.
In a journalism school?
Yeah.
Okay.
And also in music schools, there's certain software that they need that's bespoke.
Okay, well, you've reinforced my point maybe a little bit because it's a journalism school, right, that's using it. But I just, my not so subtle point was that I don't think there's many commercial environments where you have a shared use computing setup, where in order for someone to do their job, they leave their desk and they go into a different room where they have access to technology to do their work. And I think, we're seeing that change in schools where technology used to be a subject that you would go and study, like you'd go to the art room, you would go to the technology room. But in the way that all of our work environments now are so heavily dependent on the use of technology to do anything, I mean, can you imagine, can anyone here do their job without the internet? I know. Yeah. I couldn't, right? And I think the same thing's happening in education where technology is not just a subject you study, but it's something that enables all the other learning that happens all the time.
Sure.
And so locking it away in a lab is useful in some scenarios, right? Having an edit bay or something like that, a bunch of Mac Studios, more powerful if if you're teaching people to edit 8K video, having a lab of Mac Studio would probably be great. But day to day, kids need access to technology in order to just do the regular learning.
Absolutely, and I think you're absolutely right. The flexibility that it allows you to have is what is the power of it. So, it's got to be fit for purpose.
That's exactly it. And I think that in a lot of cases, I think back to my own secondary education. And, I got my start working in Mac IT in the computer labs because at the time when I went to college, which I will admit was the late 1990s, computers were still not common in the dorms. Wi-Fi didn't yet exist in a form that could be used. I mean, I think the first iBook comes out there at the end of college, and the first airport, the old UFO, comes out at that point. The fact that computers were really about a place you went to do a thing that resulted in network connectivity, usually, and that disappeared with the advent of Wi-Fi and effective laptops and effective applications. And the democratization of those technologies, both in feature set and price, have really made the difference for how we approach those things. And while I can certainly think of, at JumpCloud we've got to think about servers as well as devices, I would say that most of our device deployments are one-to-one. There's not 4 device users on that machine and they take turns, except in rare cases now. That's left for the Linux server in the cloud. We've got a couple of questions here in the back.
Yeah, I was just going to say I don't now, but I previously worked in a higher education music college, which was similar to what's already been said, that in that kind of specialist environment, I think there is still a call for labs, if nothing else from a cost and a licensing perspective. You'd have 10 grand's worth of software on each Mac. The Macs were probably 5 to 6 grand iMacs. They'll probably be Mac Studios, I assume, going forwards. We can't really, and every so often we get academics who say, well, why don't we just give all the students a laptop? And it's like, so you want to pay to give a laptop that would probably be, to do what you need to do, 3 grand plus 10 grand of software for 1,000 students, or we could have 100 machines, spread them out. And I think that's probably where we'll still require it.
And the education environment is fascinating because really what you're doing is you're teaching them to use that tool. And, to the point where they are unlikely to own their own license initially for that $10,000 worth of software because of what it does. And in fact, the skill that they then possess becomes the portability and not the equipment and the software. And that skill that comes out of that gets applied.
Absolutely, and that skills approach is something that is quite, I would say new in education, but it's become more potent to be able to say that you have a transferable skill rather than you have a content knowledge of a particular application at a particular time. And I think that's the flexibility and the adaptability that is needed in students to be world ready, because they're using the same kit in school that they would do when they're in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And I think just having that acknowledged is a huge step forward in education.
Thank you. We have a question that's framed in the form of a talk proposal, maybe for MacAdmin or MacADUK here 2023. Are we announcing that yet? Coming shortly, all right. So watch this space.
I've been saying that for 2 years.
Cancel or allow. What do you think is the best way to work around, and I like this phrasing, to work around macOS privacy restrictions, especially screen recording and accessibility, and super annoying allow notifications for each app? So someone seems to be quite perturbed about Apple's very strict stance on privacy.
Apple's strict stance on privacy is a fact of reality. It is not changing. I'm going to say that again because I think it bears repeating. Apple believes in user privacy regardless of what computer they use. And I don't see that changing. I can see adaptations coming, and it would be my hope that for one and one change only, if I was to wave my magic wand, I would say that I would love for admins to be able to say screen recording, permission allowed for one app. You can choose the app. Only if you're enrolled through automatic or automated device enrollment. And that at that point you can essentially, and the first time it launches, that's where you see the consent. Your admin has decided that this app can share screen. And so that if you don't like that, you quit the application or you shut the lid on the computer and have a pleasant, if stern, conversation with your colleagues. But I think that in terms of, are we going to see major wholesale changes to the rest? I don't.
And I think as well, when we're looking at these notifications and stuff, these prompts and things, the end users aren't going to see them as much as us if we're deploying machines or building them for them. So we might have the dialogue fatigue because we've seen these apps present multiple times, but actually the person who's going to be using the machine might only see that once. So Chrome, obviously Chrome, we said about the signing cert. Yeah. So that happened, obviously they saw that then, so saw it twice, but you know, for that person there, that's the only time they're really going to see that. Whereas again, if we're building things, we might make it look worse because of the way in which we work. And also a lot of these alerts are supposed to be context kind of, they're supposed to come in context. So notifications load at the beginning of an app launching most of the times. But it's that screen recording thing and the rest of it. It's supposed to be contextual. It's supposed to be, you click the button here, by the way, to allow this is the step. So that's what's quite nice about it in that way. I actually like the fact that there's a context around it. So it's not just a random thing of just saying, just randomly this app's loaded, it wants all permission to all the things. So I think the fatigue is our side, us as the IT folks necessarily, than maybe our colleagues that we're setting up machines for.
Yeah, I mean, we get asked about some of this in a few different contexts, and one is, you know, using our privileged position as an MDM provider to circumvent some of the privacy controls that Apple has. Like, hey, can we use the fact that you have this privileged position on the platform to do additional kind of user level monitoring or whatnot that Apple doesn't give us, you know? And we're very reluctant to do that because I think it is important. Like, well, this is a bit of a tangent now, but you know, we talk about PPPC, right? But the original thing was TCC, transparency, consent, and control. Did I get that right? You did. Yep. Control. Yep. Okay. So I think the transparency part is really important here. That the user should know what is being monitored, what's being accessed, what kind of information is available to the workplace. I do think the organization has some. I think it's reasonable to say I would like to know the location of the device at certain times. You know, lost mode being one of those things. It'd be nice to have that kind of thing on Mac OS as well. I think it's reasonable to ask for a few other things, or to be able to say, like, I want to allow Zoom in order to use the camera and the microphone while it's running. I think it's okay for an organization to say that for a device that they own. We don't have those capabilities today, but I think it's reasonable to ask Apple to refine their approach. I mean, you mentioned they're not going to change I think they're not going to change the relative importance of privacy, right, and their commitment to privacy, but the implementation can be adjusted, I think, to better serve the needs of ourselves and customers.
Yeah, and I think that I don't think that's ever coming to user accepted MDM enrollment. for example. I think
Oh,
because
yeah.
you know the number of things. I mean, Apple really wants to avoid that situation where a user is tricked into enrolling in a mobile device manager, and I think that that's a valid concern. I can definitely see those kind of settings though arriving at automated device enrollment, probably one at a time. And I think that maybe this summer, maybe if our feedback requests have been heard by the product folks at Apple, maybe that's the kind of change that we see. But I think that's only going to be locked down behind automated device enrollment. Is there anybody here today not using ADE in some way? Yay.
Let it be noted for the
One of the
live stream, I
servers
can't see any
raised their
hands.
Oh.
All right. Wonderful. All right, another question, and I think we're winding up a little bit here, but we got.
Joel, can I just ask? Sorry, can I ask a question on that one? A bit loud. I just want to, following on from that, I just wondered how you reconcile, thinking about what we've talked about today, there's sort of the desire to deliver security and perhaps lock devices down and restrict users in a way that IT can control, yet on the other hand give both employees and students freedom to be creative and productive. Because there's a bit of a kind of conflict there, isn't there? How do you reconcile that?
So that the tension between control and flexibility or allowing the user to use the device. I think this is actually really important for our community as Mac admins, because a lot of the success we're seeing with the adoption of macOS in the enterprise has come through choice programs. Saying that, okay, we've had Windows, but now we'll allow Mac as a choice. And when you set the context that way, that, hey, we're allowing Mac into our enterprise because our users prefer this platform, because we're giving them a choice because they're more productive when they choose an Apple device for their computing platform. It's really important that we don't erase the differences between the Apple platforms and other choices they have. There's reasons why folks chose to use an Apple device at work. And so the tools that you use, the controls that you use to manage those devices should enhance that platform. It shouldn't dilute the experience that the user was looking for when they chose to use a Mac at work. So it's always a difficult balance to navigate, but I think it's actually really critical to our success as a whole community, right? That we adopt methods and practices that allow the platform to shine in the enterprise.
Well, and I think that gets coupled with you can't lock your machines to the point where you'll never consider unlocking them. And that so many organizations I know set one policy once upon a time and then never revisit it. And that there's never a thought of, well, we could consider opening this up if this condition is met. And so, and if, a periodic examination of your own policies can go a long way to saying, hey, and some of that also comes from, things like employee feedback groups into IT, so that you can build within your IT structures a way of consuming feedback from your users about what they can't do, and then figure out how to say yes, where yes is an answer that today you might not necessarily like. I think that we all need to have that situation where we would be willing to reconsider a restriction if we felt it would pay dividends for our staff. And, I think of all of the IT environments that I've been part of, even others as a consultant or at JumpCloud, where we think about, we want to make these great experiences where I cannot, one of the things that I have really loved about going to work for someone else other than me has been the number of people that I work with on a given day. I was part of a team of 4 for the 15 years. I'm now part of a team of several hundred. And the stuff that individual people can do is nothing short of astonishing. But the belief that, you can enable these people to do that job is really exciting. That's a great part of being in IT, is that you're a meta part of their achievements by opening doors for them. And that's exciting. So open more doors.
Vicki, what's your perspective from education, like between controlling the device and allowing students or staff to use it?
I think because all the schools that I work in, or referred to use MDM, and they have to have a conversation about what is restricted. Now, there's quite a fine line between disabling something like airdrop, for example, which for me is critical if you're going to connect and collaborate and be creative in the classroom. You need to be able to airdrop. However, there's also an argument about safeguarding. So if you have some students who quite like to get around your restrictions and use it to their own ends, to me that's where you're in the right place, really. You need to make the mistake in school and you need to be shown why that is wrong. So I would err on the side of not restricting myself, but I completely understand if there is safeguarding issues that are going to be forced, then it needs to be looked at.
I mean, those are also places where you can tier your policies based on user behavior or coworker behavior. I'm trying hard to disabuse myself of the user language because others, right? Like it takes them away from who they are. They're your coworkers. They're your colleagues. And so I was going to say, some people, okay, I will just put this right out there. If we go bowling later, I'm terrible at bowling, like really bad, embarrassingly bad. But bowling's a hell of a lot of fun if you put up the guardrails. Computing's the same way. If you've got a user who's struggling, who gets themselves in trouble, it's probably not because they're maliciously trying. I hope not. Put up the guardrails a little bit. They're going to have a better experience. And life's too short. I'm never going to learn how to bowl a 300 game. It's just not happening, people. It's just not.
Why hold yourself back?
Question over here.
No, I was just going to add a point. I think Weldon mentioned earlier about admins rolling up into CISO nowadays, and the technologists starting to roll up into that tower. And I think it's a really, what you were just discussing is a really good reason why that shouldn't be the case. That CISO should act as a vertical across everybody. They set the standard and they set the policy, but then the Mac admins and other admins, the product owners, etc., should be there to put together the product, but also to advocate for the end users and the colleagues to say, well, hold on, this policy's, I understand the policy, but if you try and implement this control, this impacts people's ability to use the device.
Well, and I'll just come right back to say that management goes both directions. In good organization, management goes both directions.
Agree.
If you are in an organization that believes management is top-down and only top-down, there are 60 openings on JumpCloud.com/careers. Just putting that out there.
All right. Let's move on. We got a couple other questions here, and it's scratching at, I think, this itch that a few people have been talking about. What are good skills for Mac admins, or let's just call Apple admins, to focus on? So maybe more softer skills. We've talked about user interaction. We've talked about empathy. We've talked about some of those things. Any thoughts on that?
I'd say the skill that I want for myself, a little bit more than any other skill that I currently don't have, is I need to learn Swift at some point. I am a liberal arts major.
I'm hiring.
I was going to say, you are hiring. You don't want to teach me, though, do you? I'm a liberal arts major. I have a degree in political science and vocal performance. I've never spent time getting the formal construction of programmatic languages. I feel like I need to go back to college or get in a certification program to understand CS 101. Because as admins, we're not always down at the CS 101 level, are we? We're abstracted multiple layers up. We're talking, we're in the MDM client space, we're in the application deployment space. None of that is stuff that really requires me to do more than scripted code, where I'm learning how to write, Bash, and I'm fairly adept at that now. But in terms of writing a structured language or a compiled language as opposed to anything else, I would say that's a great skill for any Mac admin to pick up. Because if you can automate yourself to the bar a little bit earlier, or home to your family, or give yourself time on the weekends, because I don't know who saw Encanto, but there's that conversation about that you need to make room for joy in your life instead of stress and expectations. That was the message I took out of Encanto, which was a delightful movie that snuck up behind me and just coshed me on the head. But that's where I would say a great skill is we're here. We're in the management layer of things. It would probably be helpful for us to understand the internals and the below that. And that's not a common approach.
So you brought up something that I think is interesting. And the concept of getting a little more into compiled languages is because of something that starts with P and ends with N that is no longer on the operating system as of 12.3, correct?
Sure. Well, I was going to say I'd love to understand Python a little bit better because, I understand it does things way better than Bash. But at least in terms of string manipulation. And
Bash is at least on the system.
Yeah, JSON itself, right, necessitates the use of Python. I don't want to do that in Bash anymore.
Life's too short.
Vicky, from your perspective as an educator, what sorts of skills and learnings do you talk about in training up?
Sure. So in terms of, there's a national curriculum.
Yeah.
So there is a computing national curriculum. And I think traditionally that's now been looked at IT time, that's half an hour, and you do that, tick skills off in that time. But actually, it's much wider than that, and it opens up digital learning into all cross-curricular areas. And central to that is coding, in fact. So it's bringing computational thinking into the curriculum through maths, through English, through science and history. And that's the offer that is now beginning to purvey much more readily. But that's not to say that people just teach a skill in a particular application. I'm lucky to work with the kind of top echelons of the schools that are Apple Distinguished schools, so have access to Swift playgrounds and have all that ability.
Are classes being built around Swift playgrounds as a curriculum?
Yes.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Right on.
So now you can directly start to develop an app on iPad.
Yep.
From just conception through to the actual app.
Fantastic. I know I did some of the initial Swift Playground stuff, and I'm probably not the target audience anymore, and I haven't touched it anymore. So that's exciting to see that.
I think the latest thinking there was to, initially Swift was for 10 years plus. So primary age children weren't really accessing it, but now they've just released it for 4-year-olds.
Sure. And that way you're not starting with Logo or whatever the turtle was that...
Logo.
Oh, gosh.
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that
Maybe I just dated myself
yeah,
there.
you just did. So, yeah, we don't talk about Logo much now.
We don't talk about Logo much anymore. All right, well,
What is it?
moving
Print
on,
10,
next
go to 10?
question. Who's using a stylus for their iPad?
So in terms of schools...
Well, certainly in terms of schools,
Yeah.
but just in general.
So there are more schools now entering into buying a package for their students. So if they're working on iPad, it will be with pencil. They are mostly independent schools, I have to say, but some very forward-thinking state schools have also gone down that route. Remember, I was talking about finance at the beginning. So they've cut out printing in order to afford pencils, because that enables them to access the world in a very different way.
I have a feeling every admin just smiled a little bit when you said that they were cutting printing out of the budget.
Yeah, it's still there because this is now talking about inspection and, Ofsted
Yes.
and, what is acceptable as giving feedback. So again, it's a multifaceted attempt or approach that you've got to have now. So you're not just talking about the relevance of having a stack of resources to revise from. It doesn't have to be tangible for the student. Sometimes it has to be tangible for the parent, not necessarily the student. They can look it up on their iPhone, or they can look it up on their iPad. It's a very different approach, so it's about perception as well. But there are some amazing places that are working with styluses, not just Apple Pencil.
I'd like to hear Ben's answer to what skills admin should be working on so that I can learn what I should be doing.
There's just one thing. It's more of a kind of it's a skill that I'd like people to use, because it kind of annoys me when I look at code and it's spaced, it's tabbed, it's all over the place. And using linters, in any language you've got, a linter will generally let you know if there's any issues, anything that you've done wrong, or anything that could be taken in a different way. So it could be that you're doing some variable expansion in a language, and because you didn't double quote it, it could actually mean that it breaks because there's spaces and things. And these linters and stuff will help do these things. They can teach you a lot about a language. Some of them can kind of shout at you and complain. That's always fun. If you've done any PyLint stuff for Python, you get a nice score at the end. It should be 10. And when you first run a script and it's like -5, you're like, oh. It's just the whole thing. But,
Fail forward.
Yeah.
And I mean, with that as well, if you all link and use the same stuff as a team, your code's going to be easy for you then to kind of digest amongst yourselves as well. So that's my little thing of working now with more and more people. It's like, we need a standard here, and let's have something that shouts at us and makes the standard better.
Yeah, I was going to say, I had to write some policies at JumpCloud, and GoFMT is fairly helpful at pointing out that I don't know things. And that's great. I mean, like you said, fail forward. Don't be afraid to do that. You know, dive in, learn what you don't know. And I say that as someone who's a little bit of a perfectionist and a little bit afraid of failure. But, you know, you got to take chances at some point.
All right, we're going to wrap up a bit with our bonus question.
Bonus.
And our bonus question, we're going to start with Ben and move our way down the line. What are you going to do with your new Mac Studio?
Earlier on talked about the iPad and the stylus and that, and I'm one of these people that's probably like there's a few people in the room. I have an amount of kit, and I just do terrible things to it. I'm like workflows, codes, scripts, and stuff. So if it was Mac Studio, it would probably sit there in my office and wish it hadn't.
Fair. Vicky?
Okay, so I am musically challenged. So I think...
and an M1 Max can change that?
Well,
or an
there's
M1
some
Ultra,
incredible things that you can do on GarageBand in terms of moving yourself forward. I'd like to explore more.
Okay.
That's good.
Weldon?
Well, the honest answer is that I would just use it for Zoom and email. What I like to, so I think what I would like to do with it is more musical
creation
oriented. Yeah. So I played jazz in high school through college and for another 20 years or so on the side, and I kind of hung up all my guitars and things about 10 years ago when work and life got really busy, and I'd love to be able to get back to it.
Yeah, does this involve winning the lottery too? Because, like, I mean, I need infinite time here to accomplish the things that we're talking about. But, you know, I think that, you know, we think about what the Mac the Mac Studio is capable of. And, you know, you think about all the power that's in that chip. It's immense. And you think about the kind of workflows that you can throw at it. I mean, video processing is huge. I mean, I spent a lot of time in the college and post-college age doing a lot of video production. And I was going to say, I'm thinking back to like Final Cut like 1.2, which is what I cut my teeth on, and all of those things. And I'm just thinking about being able to edit, you know, multiple 8K streams in real time without proxies. And I'm just like, rocket science, you know, black magic. Not sure what you've done here, but that idea is fascinating to me. And I would say dive back into video production. And I was going to say there shouldn't be anything stopping me from doing that now. I've got one of the new M1, Mac or Pro-based MacBook Pro 14s. So there shouldn't be anything stopping me from that now. I will say the new
You just
studio
need that
display is
8K,
nice.
like red camera.
Yeah, I was going to say, again, winning the lottery, very, very helpful in acquiring a red, an 8K red camera, which I understand is approximately 1 kidney. So I like both of my kidneys where they are. And so I think I gotta win the lottery first.
You're all much more exotic. I'm just hoping to run 6 tabs in Chrome for longer than a few hours.
2 instances of Slack.
Yeah, maybe that's more the RAM than the
fair enough.
than the process. So thank you all very much. We very much enjoyed having you out here. Very appreciative to the MacAD UK staff, as this has been a great conference. And I'm going to hand it back over to Alex, who is, I think, going to tell us where to go next, right?
Great, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Can I ask you to give a big hand of applause? Thank you very much. That was great content. It was really interesting.
Please subscribe and check out more content from us.